Today my guest is Cynthia Ruchti. And I heard that there was heartbreak behind most smiles. And I observed that some of that heartbreak came from somebody else's bad decision.
Live your faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today my guest is Cynthia Ruchti. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Cynthia is a prolific author, I think.
That's a nice word.
Yes.
Let's use that word.
Okay. One of the books that I have been very impressed with is called Ragged Hope, Surviving the Fallout of Other People's Choices. This is a much needed resource.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about this book and why you wrote it?
I have, over the course of time, I worked for Christian radio for 33 years. I wrote and produced a radio broadcast called The Heartbeat of the Home. And through talking with women and the listeners that would write in and share their stories, but then walking through life, I've had several decades to walk through life and come in contact with people that I knew were bearing very difficult things. And of course, as with any of us, we walk through our own circumstances that try men's souls, as someone has said before. And through the course of all of that, I started to listen a little deeper than I had before, and I heard that there was heartbreak behind most smiles. And I observed that some of that heartbreak came from somebody else's bad decision. And someone is left to pick up the pieces of that. There are a lot of books written to the people who make those bad choices, and how do they deal with that? How do they find restoration with the Lord? But I didn't think that there were as many books as maybe could be out there, or maybe told from a little different perspective about the idea of how does that person left to pick up the pieces find hope again. It's clouded by the issues they're dealing with. It's clouded by all of the circumstances that they have to deal with every day. It may be grandparents who are forced to raise their grandchildren. Now, raising your grandchildren is a wonderful thing, but there's a heartache if you're forced into that place because of circumstances with your daughter or your son being unable to care for the children. There are circumstances where someone may have, where a spouse may have gambled away everything, including the house, and the other spouse is left to pick up those pieces and go on with life. So many life circumstances that can relate to. So my heart really was to pull back that curtain and show people that there is hope lying in front of us, even in those really dark situations when we're bearing the details of the messes. I was walking one day across a college campus in the Midwest, a beautiful campus that had cobblestone on the courtyard, and there were teens or young people, probably college-age students, whose whole job that summer was to take a putty knife and scrape all the gum off of the cobblestones because people had thrown their gum on the ground instead of in the trash can that was half a step away. And it was such a picture to me that, man, that's what we are doing. Some of us are taking a putty knife to the messes of life that other people made. Where's the hope in that? Where can we find hope in that?
Well, I think, like I said, this is a much needed resource. And a lot of people, it's like they don't get it, that the consequences of our sins are often on other people.
Passed on to other people.
That's right.
In fact,
Yeah.
I think that most times they are. There's another book that will be coming out next year, another nonfiction from Abingdon Press. It's called Tattered and Mended, The Art of Healing the Soul. That one kind of takes the opposite perspective about whether the consequences are because of our own actions or whatever has tattered us in life, and being able to find that God can make that healing be artful. When He does it, it's embroidery. It's not just patching something together in a tacky way. But for this particular book, the more I studied and the more I talked to people, the more I realized that almost everyone is bearing some kind of fallout from somebody else's bad decision. It may have been a teacher way back, many, many years ago, who put us off on the idea of education, just a soul-draining thing. Completely changes a life path for someone. It could be far less dramatic or far more dramatic than that. But everybody, I believe, is bearing some kind of this, the fallout. I think of the ash cloud from a volcano, or one of the word pictures that strikes home so much for me is at 9/11, when we're watching the towers fall and that massive cloud of ashes engulfing people, racing down the street, chasing people. They can't breathe. There's nowhere to go where they can catch a breath. And that's how people often feel when they're caught in this turmoil of what somebody else has decided to do, or some mistake they've made, or some accident that is their doing. And then we find ourselves in that place of, now where do I go? How do I cope with this? Where do I find hope in the middle of all of it?
And where do they find hope?
And where do they find hope? My particular conviction is they can find hope in no other than Jesus Christ and in His Word. There are many, many people that even have a hard time connecting with Him, connecting with God at a time when life is so torn apart and so full of agony. They often blame Him. And one of the premises in the book is, if we stiff-arm God, that's the opposite of what we need to do at a time like this when we're so desperate. And there's very little, it seems, that we can do, very little to hold on to. So one of the premises in the book is that oftentimes it's one small thing today, or one small thing for a whole month, and then another small thing that will get us through.
Little baby steps.
Baby steps sometimes, and sometimes that's where faith really shows itself strong. Faith, when everything is going really well, almost seems automatic for many people, especially those who have either grown up in the church or have come to have some kind of experience with the Lord. But for those who, they're in the middle of a time period like this where it's such a struggle, there's that distance that they feel, but the distance is caused by the circumstances, not by God distancing Himself from us. His heart's desire is to embrace us in that time, to carry us through that time. He often talks about that. Would you mind if I shared a passage?
Please do.
There's a passage from the Bible that seems to fit this so well, and it's in Psalm 107. In this passage, it starts out the way we know so well. Give thanks to the Lord because He's good, because His faithful love lasts forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Many of us are very familiar with that verse. But then there is a pattern of 4 different sets of people who all found themselves in a desperate situation, but for very different reasons. So if we can take just a moment or two to talk about that. Here's part of this passage begins in verse 4. Some of the redeemed had wandered into the desert, into the wasteland. They couldn't find their way to a city or a town. They were hungry and thirsty. And we can see there are many of us like that we maybe just wander off path a little bit, and we're not where we truly need to be, and that's where the trouble comes into our lives. But the pattern is in God's Word. So they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and God delivered them from their desperate circumstances. God led them straight to human habitation. So what are they supposed to do? What's the response? Let them thank the Lord for His faithful love and His wondrous works for all people. Because God satisfied the one who was parched with thirst, or in this kind of situation, who was desperate for hope, just hope drained. And He filled the hungry with good things. So here's a second set of people. Some of them had been sitting in darkness and deep gloom. We would think maybe a depression, like depression would be.
That often comes with these kind of circumstances.
Often does, whether temporary or long-term, or just lingers for a very long time. They were prisoners suffering in chains, some of them because they had disobeyed God's instructions and rejected the Most High's plans. So God humbled them with hard work. They stumbled and there was no one to help them. Many understand that feeling completely. So they cried out in their distress, and God saved them from their desperate circumstances, same pattern. God brought them out from the darkness and deep gloom. He shattered their chains. And here's what their response was to be. Let them thank the Lord for His faithful love and His wondrous works for all people, because God has shattered bronze doors and split iron bars in two. Here's the third set. Some of the redeemed were fools because of their sinful ways, and we see that often happens too in life. People we care about very deeply, people we love, can often act in very foolish ways. Children or spouses or extended family members. Fools because of their sinful ways. They suffered because of their wickedness. They had no appetite for food, so they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and God saved them from their desperate circumstances. God gave the order and healed them. He rescued them from their pit. Let them thank the Lord for his faithful love and his wondrous works for all people. Let them offer thanksgiving offerings and declare what God has done in songs of joy. Now here's the fourth group that really speaks to my heart and really speaks to the heart of the book, Ragged Hope, Surviving the Fallout of Other People's Choices. Some of the redeemed had gone out on the ocean in ships, making their living on the high seas. They saw what the Lord had made. They saw his wondrous works in the depths of the sea. They were minding their own business. They were worshiping God. They were behaving themselves. But a storm was stirred up. It brought the waves up high. The waves went as high as the sky. They crashed down to the depths. The sailors' courage melted at this terrible situation. They staggered and stumbled around like they were drunk. None of their skill was any help. So they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and God brought them out safe from their desperate circumstances. God quieted the storm to a whisper. The sea's waves were hushed. So they rejoiced because the waves had calmed down, and God led them to the harbor they were hoping for. Let them thank the Lord for his faithful love and his wondrous works for all people. So when I read that and I began to see, it doesn't matter what got us into the circumstance. It doesn't matter if it was somebody else's fault or if it was our own fault. The pattern is still the same. We cry out to the Lord in our distress. He rescues us, and then we have to turn around and thank the Lord for his faithful love.
Thank you for reading that. I think that's definitely to the point, and I think that will bless a lot of viewers. One of the things I was wanting you to talk about, because you are a fiction author too, is your latest fiction books.
Okay, I have several novels from Abingdon Press right now. My debut novel in 2010 was They Almost Always Come Home, about a woman whose husband didn't come home from his 2-week trip to Canada, and she wasn't sure she wanted him to. A very real book, but laced with hope as well. The second one is When the Morning Glory Blooms, and that was the story of 3 women from different eras who were all dealing with some kind of after effects of unplanned pregnancy. They were dealing with the fallout of unplanned pregnancy. And then this recent one is All My Belongings, and that's the story of a woman whose family life was anything but what was comfortable to her. In fact, she didn't feel like she belonged in the family that she was born into. Her parents made choices that made her feel like she was not a part of their family. She was an only child, but they didn't really want to have children. So she grew up with that extreme emptiness that she'd never really connected with her parents. And then her parents made choices that were diametrically opposed to what she believed in her core. And her father actually was kind of a Dr. Kevorkian kind of person.
Wow.
So the shame that he brought on her family and on her was community-wide, and when the news got a hold of it, it was really nationwide. She wanted to distance herself as far as she could from that. She had the heart of a caregiver. When she stepped into that role of caregiving in another circumstance where that caregiving was welcome and accepted, she began to see that belonging has far less to do with an address or from where you came from than it is finding where you truly belong in the embrace and the comfort and the heart of God with you.
Well, where can people find you online?
They can find me at CynthiaRuchti.com. I'll have to spell that because it's an unusual last name. Cynthia is the traditional way, Cynthia. Ruchti is RUCHTI.com. I'm on Facebook too at Cynthia Ruchti Reader Page. There are other places too that they can reach me, but through either of those channels they can get to me easily.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for being our guest. It was wonderful.
Thank you. It was a real joy.